This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin, and this is a very special episode of IRCB because I'm not joined by any of the regular folks on our show. Instead, I'm joined by two very special guests, Eric Rezsnyak.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for asking. No one ever asks me that. I thank you so much for that.
So
I appreciate
rude.
it.
Yeah.
And I'm also joined by Kevin Dillon.
Hey there. Happy Sunday.
Thank you both for joining me on the show this week. I'm very excited to talk to both of you because we're here to talk about comic books, and we're specifically here to talk about X-Men comics. But before we get into all of that, I need to know a little bit about the both of you. For the people at home who are listening, Eric, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? And then Kevin, feel free to jump in once Eric's wrapped up.
Sure. So, hi. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to do this. I am a lifelong comic book fan. I started reading, in the 1980s because I'm old. And my first comic book I remember getting, we were on a cross-country trip, and my parents were trying to shut my brothers and I up, so we would stop at like gas stations and they would buy us comic books. And remember the Secret Wars issue where like the Hulk is holding the mountain on the cover and all the heroes are trapped underneath it? That's my first ever comic book reading. So we're talking like 84, 85. Specifically, we're talking about X-Men. My first issue of X-Men was 228, the issue after they all died in Fall of the Mutants. I had no idea what was happening.
Right.
Like, this sucks. And then we came back to it a couple years later, right when Inferno started, which I also had no idea what was happening, but I fucking loved it. So that I've read X-Men pretty much consistently all the way up since then. So we're talking about almost 4 decades of X-Men knowledge. Beyond that, I'm in fundraising currently for my day job. I'm a former journalist. I actually interned at Marvel Comics in the 1990s, and I am the host of the Great Pop Culture Debate podcast, of which your host Mike and Kevin are panelists.
Yeah, and I'm I got a lot of questions about how you continued to read X-Men through the 90s and into the 2000s, but we'll get into that in the second half of the episode. Kevin, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Kevin Dillon. I have read comics probably since like 1990, similar to Eric. Instead of a gas station, we used to go to this video store called Coulson's in Albany. It was like a convenience store, video rental store, all in one like small thing. And they always had a rack of magazines and a pretty solid comic selection. So I would always rent a movie. We'd rent either the Muppets or we'd rotate different Muppets things that we'd rent. And then I'd buy some comics. And I used to buy a lot of like Scooby-Doo and more cartoon-like comics. And then I was a big Batman reader for a really long time. I have 2 Batman tattoos, so that is probably not surprising to the folks who know me. And then I would say my fall into I've also read the X-Men since really around that time too. I probably started around like 1992, 93. I would say probably my first comic that I remember buying or that really caught my attention was X-Men #1. Which I think is still the highest selling comic of all time with the multiple covers.
Yeah. The multiple covers.
Yeah, so I had every single cover. I was very into that, and I was like, okay, let me deep dive into this. It was also kind of around the time the cartoon was starting and like really connected. And so, fun fact, I have every single issue of Uncanny X-Men since like now. I bought beyond this, but since like 1987.
Holy smoke, where do you store it?
Oh, let me tell you, moving is not fun, and I just moved, so it was a trek and a journey, but I have them all still, and I refuse to get rid of them. There's been some highs and some lows, honestly, some real lows. But I have read X-Men ever since then, and really have tried to stay up to date. There was a period where I wasn't really reading comics in general, so like catching up on some of that, but always been a huge X-Men fan and X-Men fan, and excited to jump into the conversation around all of this, what's going on with X-Men right now.
Yeah, then today we're going to be talking about HoXPox and beyond. But before we get into any of that, it is a lawfully mandated thing now on this show. I have to ask 2 questions, which is, how have you been and how have comic books been? So, Eric, what have you been reading? How have you been?
I've been great, thanks. We're hashtag thriving in our quarantine apocalypse.
Yeah.
Mostly I've been working on our podcast, and that's been it's been a lot of fun and a great joy. We just launched season 2 like 2 weeks ago. That's been a lot of my time, but I love doing it. It's such a fun thing to do during this period. If you enjoy listening to people who are fairly entertaining, moderately intelligent. I'm kidding. I love all our panelists. Argue and insult each other over things like the best Disney movies or what fast food chains are better. Please check us out at greatpopculturedebate.com. Sorry for that incredibly ham-fisted plug. Terms of, that's okay? You enjoy the ham-fisting?
Absolutely fine. We don't have shameless plug, or we don't have shameful plugs on this show. It's just plugs. Be proud of the shit that you do. The end.
Fantastic. I love that because, I had my shame surgically removed sometime in the mid-90s. In terms of what I'm reading currently with comics, so like Kevin, I had a period where I stopped cold turkey. There was a while up through the maybe 2010s where I was dropping $40 to $60 a week on comics every week.
Oh yeah.
And I was dealing with student loan issues, and I was like, you know what? How about we not do this anymore? And I quit cold turkey. And since then, I've gone strictly digital, strictly digi, and I regret that not at all. And so now I'm reading primarily the X books. HoXPox brought me back in. I would start in fits and starts for the past 10 years, and they would always lose me, but I'm very much intrigued by what they're doing now. Beyond that, what I'm reading for this current week, I read the new issues of Excalibur. I read X-Men 12. I read all the X books that came out this week. Am I supposed to go over my thoughts on those now? Mr.
Yeah,
Producer?
if you want. Yeah, please.
Sure.
I mean, really quick, I guess just of those issues, unless you want to save the discussion for the second half of the show, that's totally fine.
No, I'm fine talking about both of them right now because I think they're essential. Excalibur, of all the Dawn of X relaunches, I think is the second weakest after Fallen Angels, which has already been canceled. I think Excalibur's a goddamn mess. And I stopped buying it after issue 8, but I came back for this one because it's clearly, and it very much is, integral to the Ten of Swords crossover that's coming. If you did drop Excalibur, I understand why.
Yeah.
But you have to read it for I think the crossover to make sense, especially X-Men 12, which it directly leads into that. So Excalibur continues to be a mess. It is a mess of a book, and I hope we just kind of disentangle that in the second half. X-Men 12 I thought was really good, despite the fact that no actual X-Men appear in it. And it's a very complicated, dense issue, which none of it really is. You're just the fuck is going on right now?
Sure,
but I felt it gave me enough kind of signal posts so that I have a general concept of where we're going in this sprawling crossover that's coming. Do I love it? No, but I don't dislike it either. I'm intrigued. I'll say that. Right. So that's where I'm coming from. Interesting.
I have a lot of thoughts on X-Men 12 that I will bring up in the second half of the show, because having just reread House of X and Powers of 10, there's a lot of interesting connections. So anyways, Kevin, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been? What have you been reading?
I've been okay. So I am currently, I'm currently unemployed. So I am on the job hunt still, which has been challenging, but I've been keeping myself busy doing other things and I didn't share this earlier, but I actually freelance with an entertainment website called Awards Daily. And I write primarily for their TV site. So today's actually a big day. The Emmys are tonight. They're doing them on Zoom, which will be entertaining.
Interesting.
They've been doing the Creative Arts Emmys on Zoom all week, and it looks like they essentially did was they asked every nominee to pre-tape their speech if they won. So as the winners get announced, you'll see a speech of a winner. They actually did a really good job. I have to give them credit for being in this climate and during COVID and actually carrying through and rewarding folks. And, I actually have hope and faith that the Emmys will go really well. They're on ABC tonight, so tune in.
Yeah, I mean, this episode will be out on Wednesday, so unfortunately they'll have already aired.
That's true. Hello. Duh. This is what happens to me when Sunday my brain and my coffee haven't kicked in. But I'm really excited to do that's been keeping me busy. So I've been getting to I interviewed a lot of people for different TV shows and things like that, which has been really cool. And so that's been fun. On the comics route, I've obviously been trying to save money since I'm unemployed. With that said, I've been still reading all the X-Men books. That's really been kind of where I'm at, just because I'm in.
Yep.
I just call me Meredith Grey. I'm all in. Like, I still really am enjoying them overall. I did drop Excalibur, and I made Eric summarize what happened in the book for me. Over Messenger. I probably will try and pick it up at some point just because I need to understand, I think, where things are going. With that said, that's kind of really all I've been picking up. I mean, to be honest, like DC stuff, I've really heavily dropped off that cliff. And I've really kind of dropped off my indie books too, which is really sad, but I unfortunately kind of had to make a lot of cuts. And just really,
that's understandable.
Yeah, and so, I mean, this past week I was very excited to read Giant Size X-Men Storm, which I love. I think for me, it's the best of the Giant Size that have come out.
Without question.
Yeah, easily. Like, I think Douterman's art in this is good. Maybe I'm missing big, muscular men. A little bit, but there's something that the coloring is great. The art, I didn't dislike it, but I don't know. I reread it and I was like, this is not my favorite Russell Dauterman art that I've ever seen. And I don't know if I don't know. I'd have to reread it again and look at it. Again, I don't think it's bad. It's just, there was something interesting about it. Again, maybe I'm missing muscular men. I don't know.
I think that's his niche, honestly. I think that's where he excels, but that's his
right. No, I agree.
I haven't read any of the Giant Size books because I've only heard like bad things about them. Like I think somebody said the Phantom X one was good, but there was a couple that I just heard bad things. I was like, I'm just not going to pick these up. Like the Magneto one, I think I heard was really bad, and I was like, okay, well, if they're not important to like the main storyline, then I'm just not going to grab them. Should I go back and pick some of them up?
I didn't read the Magneto one either.
Do you want to get into this now, or do we want to wait till the end?
We can get into it right now. I'm curious if you've got like a quick thought on it.
Sure. So, Kevin, tell me if you agree with this. I felt like a bunch of them led into the Storm one. I felt like elements from Jean Grey and from the Phantom X directly lead into the Storm one. And even there was some other little bits that also reference the Nightcrawler one, which had really nothing to do with Nightcrawler.
Don't even get me started, Eric. You know
like the only... I do, yeah. Kevin and I talked about this a lot. Like, the Nightcrawler one is not a Nightcrawler story in any way, shape, or form.
That's a bummer, because he's a fucking awesome character.
And they had Alan Davis draw it. And it's such a weird story, and I don't... Like, the only thing that I think, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, a lot... All of this ultimately is going to play into the Doug Warlock thing, which I think is the big looming sword of Damocles for this entire relaunch. I think
absolutely
they are the hinge to the whole thing. And that's the only thing I think that came out of the giant-sized Nightcrawler that's worth talking about. But the only one that I don't think did play into the Storm one that came out this week was the Magneto one, which is very standalone. In it, at the end of it, Magneto constructs an island near somewhere off like the coast of the UK, specifically for Emma, and we have no idea what the purpose of that is. That was literally the whole point of it, was to get us to this island that we don't know why it's there, and we have no idea why it exists.
Well, the thing with Emma Frost right now is that it feels like she's constantly making moves behind the scenes, and I know that's why like Xavier and Magneto brought her into the fold, but at the same time, like, to what end, right? Like, is she a villain? Is she a good guy? Like, the last time we saw Emma before House of X, Dawn of X, she was like the ultimate villain. So I'm wondering like how that's going to play out. So I don't know. I don't mean to tangent completely, because if anything, we could talk about it more in the second half. I know I keep saying that over and over, but there's a lot to be said. So I guess really quick then, I've been okay. I've been, just hanging out. I've been doing a little bit of retail therapy, buying One Piece figurines off of eBay, because that's what makes me feel good.
Fabulous.
Recently I read Usagi Yojimbo book 1 Ronin. This is the first collection of the first ever Usagi Yojimbo books. If you don't know Usagi Yojimbo, it is that character you've probably seen in the previews books, or you've maybe seen it on a shelf at your local comic shop in like a big collection, where it's a rabbit samurai. And the story is really, really good. I mean, it's this book in particular, it's on Comixology Unlimited if you have that. and it's about just 10 little stories about this Ronin character who's a rabbit, and it's written and drawn by Stan Sakai. It's little small motif stories that if you hadn't read anything else, you just jumped into one of them, you'd totally get it from beginning to end. It has all of the feelings of an Akira Kurosawa. Thank you. It has all the feelings of a Kurosawa film, from beginning to end in every single story. Having just watched Seven Samurai, and literally last night I watched Yojimbo, like watching those and having read this comic, it's like, oh yeah, there's definitely some severe inspiration coming from that, as well as just general history when it comes to samurai. I was really impressed with how simple all of the stories were and how entertaining they were, with how cartoonish the story looks. Like, it definitely looks like it's like an old like Disney comic, but it's also full of samurai killing people. Like, it's kind of bloody, but it's all black and white, so it's not really gory. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I'm going to read all of the volumes that are available on CU. It's incredible. It's such an entertaining, simple little book that I think I'm really going to enjoy reading. So once I finish One Piece, I think I'm going to just read all of the Usagi Yojimbo I can get my hands on.
I've heard really good things about that book. Everyone recommends that.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, 80s kids might remember Usagi Yojimbo. He was actually a action figure as part of the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles line.
Yeah. They did do I think there's like a handful of crossover comics that they did as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have a CU subscription, like all 7 volumes that were originally published from Fantagraphics are available for you to read. So that's how I'm going to dig in, and then after that, I'll figure out what I'm going to read from Dark Horse. But anyways, the other stuff that I read, X-Men, I tried to get caught up. I read things out of order, so I read X-Men 12, then Excalibur 12, then Hellions number 4. I realized I looked at the end of Hellions 4. I was like, oh, I'm literally reading these in almost reverse order. So I got a little spoiler, but we'll talk more about X-Men in the second half of the show. And my One Piece update for this week is I'm on chapter 872. On the road to 1,000, I will be caught up before they hit 1,000, I think, at the rate that I'm going, which I'm very excited about.
Amazing.
So yeah, let's move on really quick. Let's talk about comic books that are coming out. Comics are dropping on September 23rd, 2020. Eric, Kevin, what are you guys excited for this upcoming week? Let's start with you, Kevin.
So I will say I am X of Swords. I couldn't put that on my list that I'm excited. I'm I love the X-Men, but I hate crossovers. So sure. I picked Juggernaut, which is coming out next week, which is a 5-issue limited. The character has never really... I don't know. He's never really intrigued me, but like the summary, I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. And I feel like one of the things that Marvel in general has been doing that I think has really made it stand out from DC is they've really put together some really strong minis. And so it's by Fabian Nisha. I think I said that.
I think we got that. Yeah.
Who's written X-Force and Deadpool, which I think that's like the perfect combo of a writer that you want on a Juggernaut book. Really great. Ron Garney is doing the art, and his art is really strong, I think. He's done Captain America and Daredevil. So I think, the reason I guess I'm excited about it is because I really liked the X-Men Black books overall. Like, I thought those books had a lot of care and effort. You kind of alluded to I think you were alluding to the X-Men Black with Emma Frost. I think that's been really interesting. It's been interesting to see Marvel do that. And then I guess I'm excited for X Factor in a couple weeks. I don't know what that's going to look like because it does intersect with X of Swords, but I've been really enjoying that team.
Okay. Interesting, because I have not.
We will talk about that, mister.
We'll talk about that. Eric, what about you? What are you excited for in the upcoming weeks?
Sure. So coming out this coming Wednesday is the new issue of Black Magick, which is a indie book by Greg Rucka and Nicholas Scott. I've been reading it mostly in trade, but I may switch to singles. It's first of all, Nicholas Scott, I always have loved her artwork. I think she's incredibly talented. And I love the concept for this book. It is the one thing that I found reading the first trade was this is clearly being written to be turned into a TV series. So the pacing is not terrific. Reading it as a comic, you're just like, okay, I need you to pick it up now. But as a TV show, I think it's going to work great. The second volume definitely got stronger, and it was much more pulled into the mythos they're building. It's a great concept. It's a small town sheriff in, I believe, Salem, Massachusetts, which I used to live in Boston, so that's hitting me, and comes from a long line of witches. There's witch hunters. There's something going on with demons that are coming after them. There's a lot of really compelling stuff in it, and I mean, you can't beat Greg Rucka and Nicholas Scott. They are top tier talents, and I hope that it does get turned into a movie similar to, is it Rucka who did The Old Guard? Was that him? Yeah. I have to assume this is going in that same path, and I if you haven't checked it out yet, please do. The first 2 trades are available, so I enjoy it.
I will say, if you're going to switch over to single issues, be prepared to wait. This book has had incredibly disgusting delays, and I don't know if that's Rucka or if it's Scott or if it's a combination of both or if it's just everyone being incredibly depressed right now and it's really hard to create anything. It could be all of that combined, but I know that between issues like 11 and 12, there was like a year and some change wait.
Wow.
So just a heads up on that.
As a Saga fan, I feel like I'm used to that, and you know, I consider myself a practicing masochist. So it sounds like a good time.
2 years since Saga has come out.
I know. We just finished our Saga of Saga series on Patreon, and I was worried that we started it too late because the rumor was that Saga was supposed to come back this year or maybe like late last year or something like that. And I was like, well, screw it. We're just going to go through issue by issue, talk about the entire series from beginning to end. And if Saga comes back in the middle of that, so be it. And we finished our show. It's all released, and it was recorded and released, and Saga still doesn't have an announcement when it's going to come back. So, you know, but if you get a chance, go listen to that, folks. It's nonstop plugs today here on I Read Comic Books. Anything else you want to talk about, Eric?
We'd love to see it. Yeah. So this is not coming out this week. It's coming out the week after. It's Legion of Superheroes number 9 by Brian Michael Bendis, Ryan Sook, and a cavalcade of modern artists. I'm so torn. I am a long-term Legion fan. I started reading it back during the 0 Hour reboot at DC, and then went back farther than that to read the 70s, 80s stuff, which is amazing. I'm really struggling with this relaunch. I want to love it. The designs by Sook are incredible. I love the concept that Bendis has gotten, but Bendis desperately needs an editor over at DC. Desperately needs an editor, and I mean a real editor who's actually going to do a job editing.
Sure.
And like we are now on issue 9, and they still have not introduced half of that team. And
how?
And there's a bunch of new characters who we've seen on panel, but we have no idea who they are and what they can do. And it is infuriating to me. The 2-part 8.8 and 9 are supposed to be introducing people to this team. Great. That should have been issues 1 and 2, or at the very latest, like 3 and 4. Sure. And I want to love it. I'm amazed that Ryan Sook is still on the book, because I can't think of another series where Sook has continued after like issue 4. It's not his gig, but there's so much I really want to like about the book, but God damn it, Bendis is making it so hard, and I don't know why he does that to people. Legion is a book where you need to like leverage the fandom that's like a legacy fandom to make something successful, and I feel like he's doing everything in his power to piss that fandom off. So
he did that with Young Justice too, honestly.
He did, and it got canceled. And I'm afraid that that's going to happen to Legion. Legion should be successful. It's an amazing concept, and we need that kind of optimistic future now more than ever, given the world that we live in. And he's snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory is how I'm looking at this. So that's my spiel.
Interesting. Well, I know that we have at least a handful of Legion fans out there that listen to the show. So let us know what you think of Bendis's Legion of Superheroes. I'm curious to know, because I barely know anything about Legion. So maybe that's a whole other episode where I just get schooled on Legion of Superheroes, because really that's like a blank space in my mind.
I would love to talk about it with you. I love the Legion.
Sure.
Eric got me to read it, and it's fantastic. The old books, they're so good.
Okay. Well, I Yeah, I would love that. But we're here to talk about X-Men today, folks. So let me get through this really quick. I am excited for Skulldigger and Skeleton Boy #4. This is Jeff Lemire and Tonsi Sanjic. This is one of the superhero universe, the Black Hammer verse, if you will, that Lemire's been putting out at Dark Horse. And this book has had a huge space between when issues came out because of delays and everything. Comics basically got shut down for a while, but issue #3 came out in February. Issue #4 is coming out in September, so I think I'm gonna have to go back and read issues 1 through 3. But from what I remember, I really liked what was going on in this book. It was like a mix of Punisher and Moon Knight, and kind of the shadow type characters that hide in the darkness of the night in order to stop bad people from doing things. But then there was like more mysticism and magic behind it. Again, it's been quite a bit of time, so maybe I'm misremembering some stuff. But it was a really fun book, and I've been reading pretty much all of the Black Hammer verse books at this point, so I'm excited to get another one, because I know the main Black Hammer story is kind of over, and we don't know if we're going to get any more, so I'm just kind of holding on to what I can get while we still have it. But yeah, I don't know if you guys have read any of the Black Hammer stuff, but I highly recommend at least the core Black Hammer story. It's very, very good.
Yeah, I actually bought the first volume of that on Comixology at your recommendation, and I started to read it, and I have to get back to it. I enjoyed what I was reading. So,
good.
Yeah, that sounds like a good time. I'll have to get back to it.
Yeah. But yeah, well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, what I have in my notes is HoXPox Docs Bagosh. We're going to be talking about all things House of X, Dawn of X, and probably getting into some of the stuff that we've definitely hinted at already in this episode. Everything that there is to be about X-Men and what we think about the future of X-Men, given Jonathan Hickman's, gears within gears within gears type storytelling. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. For our show this week, we are talking about all things House of X, Dawn of X, Powers of X, Powers of 10, X of Swords, Powers of Swords, Tens of Swords? I don't understand
swords
what's
across
happening.
The board.
Something, yeah, I said this last week on the show, I just want Hickman or somebody, Marvel, to put an X sword in my X God, X damn, X hand, Powers 10X, please. I don't understand where we're getting these pronunciation stuff, but we're here to kind of talk about the House of X, Powers of 10, new era of X-Men. And so, as you've heard in the first half, I brought in two severe experts to talk about X-Men. So really, I guess, to get into the core of things, Eric, Kevin, whoever wants to jump in first, and maybe I'll just start with Eric so it's easier. As someone who's been a longtime reader, how do you see this new era of X-Men in your historied eyes of reading X-Men for so many years?
Sure. So I will say this. I think it has been a real refresher for a franchise that needed a refresher. Mm-hmm. I think during the weekly launch of House of X and Powers of 10, I was completely on board. I was loving it. I thought that House of X was more successful than Powers of 10, but still I was very engaged. I think since then, the bloom has fallen off the rose a little bit, because I think we're seeing what I consider now to be the very typical Hickman trope, which we've seen in his Avengers run, his FF run, even in East of West, where he has this gigantic map. His world building is incredible, right? He is so thoughtful. He loves putting in these Easter eggs. He's an extremely intelligent person, but he likes to show off how intelligent he is. And I think he likes to do an arc where he travels around the story for a very long time before he gets to the story. And what we've experienced, I feel, in the past 12 issues of the Dawn of X titles is there's been a lot of holding pattern.
Are you telling me that when you were reading New Mutants, you didn't love them just gallivanting across the universe with no real clear intent as to what they were doing? Are you telling me that you didn't love that?
And it's so frustrating for me because I love those characters. The New Mutants, if you look back at the Claremont / the Louise Simonson run of that book, the original one, it's one of my all-time favorite comic book runs. Yeah. And I was so jazzed. I was like, yes, these characters, the movie was allegedly coming out at that time. And I was like, finally, these characters are getting their due. And that book and Kevin can attest to that book has been a real frustrating, trying to get it into gear. they don't even like the cast even sometimes changes from the original New Mutants to the Armor, Enel, Glob Herman characters who, I'll be very candid with you, I can't fucking stand.
Oh no, listeners, what things that Eric is saying are not representative of the I Read Comic Books podcast. I just want to.
Don't worry, Eric. You have another person on your side on that one.
That's fine. I stand by that. If I want to read a Kitty Pryde story, I'll read a Kitty Pryde story. I don't need Armor to come and try to like do her gig. We've seen it. We've been there. Anyway, that's me getting on my high horse. So my general feeling is, though, if you push aside your disappointments by him not having the payoffs that I was looking for, I still think what he has done is really reinvigorated the franchise at the same level that I think Morrison did when he came on in the 2001. And what I love especially is what I consider to be a sea change in the general concept of X-Men, which, you know, Morrison took it from a civil rights allegory to more about what the next stage of human evolution is going to be. And what Hickman, I feel, is doing is taking it. It's no longer the human versus mutant equation. It's human versus mutant versus machine versus post-human. And that is so exciting to me. It really has changed the game in a way that I think is fresh and new and interesting. And like Sentinel stories have never been terribly interesting to me. They're pretty formulaic. These Sentinel stories I find are harrowing. And I thought that fight on the Orcus satellite in the House of X was gripping. Absolutely gripping. So well done. And so I love this overarching thing. The idea of the resurrection protocols really kind of wipes the state clean of, you had a lot of characters that had either been killed off or drastically changed over the years. This was a cosmic reset button. Everybody's back on the table in the ways that you remember them and you love them. I thought bringing the historical villains into the fold as no longer necessarily antagonists, but players on the same scene has been really great for character development, but it's not so great from a who are now our antagonists. And mostly if you look at the antagonists in the Dawn of X books, it's a lot of nameless concepts. Like if you told me that a quartet of old ladies who are horticulturalists would be like the main recurring villains of this, I would have said, what weed are you smoking and did they grow it? Like, weird. But overall, I think there's more good than bad. I am still really engaged with most of the books. There's only a couple. I read through the entirety of Fallen Angels. That was a total
that
flop.
helped you.
Me too. Me too. Yeah. So before we get into that, I mean, Kevin, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it before we start to dive in on individual books, because I do want to talk about all of the books that have come out so far.
Yeah. Sorry, I went on. I apologize.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to get ahead.
Could say retweet or good job, like you did a great job of summarizing my feelings too. Eric, you've read maybe a couple more books that I just didn't jump on, but I think overall, House of X and Powers of 10, I reread them actually the last 2 days in prep for this. And I actually read them as House of X and Powers of 10 separately. I didn't read them in their order. And that was an Eric recommendation, actually.
You went against the scripture? What the fuck?
Sure did. And it reads better. I think it reads so much better. I also agree that House of X is much stronger. And I think more so because, I don't know, the Orcus storyline alone really is, for me, why it stands out. Like, that whole thing is just brilliant. It also has issue number 2, which is the Moira issue, which is, I think, was one of the best book. I think is the best book of House of X and Powers of 10. Like, I think it's incredible. The scene with her and Destiny and Mystique, I think, was fantastic. Love that. Yeah. I think, you know, Jonathan Hickman's It's Always Sunny random string board, like Charlie Day, is still going. He is someone who I in the past have struggled with. Like, I did not like his Avengers run, mainly because it became too convoluted for me. And I know for me, Avengers really, I like the simple Bendis storytelling for them. I do think it works though for X-Men, because the thing that Eric pointed out, Hickman he gave the X-Men the refresh that they needed. It had been a really, really long time since I really thought an arc or storyline was massively successful. Although I will huge plug to X-Men Red, which came right before this, by Tom Taylor. Those 12 issues were brilliant, and a great standalone X-Men story, if you're a fan, and one you can kind of read without knowing much. You can just jump right in and read it. It's a really great X-Men story. I think X-Men, the overall mainline book, and I know we'll get into this maybe even a little bit more. I'm starting to wear just a touch for me, and I'm enjoying some of the smaller books, and we'll get into those too. But because I want to know where things are going. Like I'm ready to take the next step. Is that X of Swords or however 10 of Swords or whatever? I don't know. Maybe. I'm not really thrilled for that storyline, to be honest with you, which may be why I'm a little frustrated at the moment. I don't like big crossover stories, but overall, like, this is exactly what we needed for the X-Men. We needed a refresh, on a palate cleanser for bringing the original 5 back, palate cleanser for, or into the future, I guess I should say, a palate cleanser for a lot of different bad storylines that happened over the last couple of years. And I think this has worked so far. I really do.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm in complete agreement. I think like this is definitely the refresh that was needed. That being said, it's funny that you say X-Men Red was a book that you really liked, because that was the one book at the time that I couldn't get into. I really actually did like X-Men Gold and X-Men Blue. And I, for some reason, I mean, with the exception of some of the Beast going into mysticism, Young Beast, and I was still kind of on the fence of like, why are the young X-Men still here? Because it seemed like that storyline had kind of faded. But
absolutely.
That being said, like, I think that this paradigm shift in the story is exactly what Eric had said. Like, it's like Morrison showing up and saying, all right, this is just a new era and this is going to set the new status quo. And that's exactly what Hickman did. I think that Marvel was hoping for something like that out of like the X-Men, or was it the Astonishing X-Men or whatever run that happened a while back, and then it all fell apart because the Terrigen bomb thing happened, which to me was an interesting storyline. But it wasn't like a game changer because it just felt like another problem that the X-Men had to deal with on top of everything else. Yep. Versus this, which is an actual new run in the world for them. Rereading House of X and Powers of 10, I read them like last night just to keep my mind refreshed. And then having read X-Men 12 this morning, I was like, holy shit, Hickman planned X of Swords from the get-go. Yeah. He planned it. Like, and that to me is like really cool. And of course, like I said, gears within gears, stories within stories. He's done it with everything. He did it with Secret Warriors. He did it with his Avengers run. He did it with his Illuminati stuff. He did it with
Shield.
Illuminati was Bendis. Either way, he did it with all the stuff that he's done. He always is building bigger stories, which is great, and I think that longtime readers always appreciate that stuff. But now to see the way that the Marvel is treating some of the X books is kind of odd to me, and this is the thing I kind of wanted to get into as we talk about the individual books. To me, I've been looking at the X-Men, all of the X-Men books as individual books that are telling stories, and sometimes they interconnect. And there was a while where it was like reading order was important, and then after the number ones, it didn't matter anymore. And now as we get up to 12 a year later, quote unquote a year later, we're seeing like that also come into play again, where you have to read them in order because X-Men is doing that thing that I think a lot of fans hate, which is you got to read these 9 books in order, otherwise you're not going to get the whole story. But the thing that I've actually come to realize is that it seems like the way that the Marvel like editorial staff or whatever is treating these books is like X-Men and New Mutants are kind of like a Detective Comics or Action Comics, where there are stories about teams and stuff, but this whole book isn't about one team, right? Like the X-Men book to me feels like Detective Comics, where we're kind of just getting a feel of Gotham, and we're focusing on different characters from month to month or from arc to arc, and then Excalibur and all of the other books are kind of like one-off things. Even Fallen Angels, which I think, Eric, you said it was canceled. I'm pretty sure that was planned as a miniseries. I don't understand how there could have ever been more story to that, let alone the story that we got. But yeah, so like I've been seeing just that trend of it feels like they're treating this as an actual like branch of comics again, versus trying to add it to the rest of the continuity world, with the exception of things like X-Men / Fantastic Four, which was a weird crossover that I still haven't finished. But yeah, anyway, so I've I've been trying to like change my mindset about how I look at these books, where there are independent stories, but they all kind of like dovetail back to a single story point, and then they'll probably branch out again and dovetail back. Because I think that's how DC has been treating the Batman books for the last few years, and they've seen pretty massive success for that. Do you guys feel the same way about it?
I definitely do. I think that's exactly what's going on. I do think, yes, Fallen Angels was intended to be mini. The thing I had read was that all of the Dawn of X launches were looked as kind of short runs from the beginning, and then they were surprised by how successful some of them were, and that's why I think maybe Excalibur was always going to play into X of Swords, right. 10 of Swords, whatever the fuck it's called.
Yeah.
But I don't know if some of the other spinoffs were supposed to last as long as they have and continue on the way they have. But I agree with you that they branched out from the initial event. There is some crossover. I think X-Force is a lot more required reading than maybe some of the other ones. Like if you're not reading X-Force, I think you're missing major plot points.
I also think Cable is going to be really big, and I feel like a lot of people are sleeping on that book for some reason, even though Phil Noto's on it.
I am not reading Cable or Wolverine. They're not characters that I resonate with. I understand why they're hugely popular. I do not begrudge them that at all. But I just tend to be like, I've read so many Cable and Wolverine stories. I don't think that you're going to give me anything that's going to be terribly compelling. But I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong.
Yeah, I haven't been reading Wolverine either, but Cable I picked up strictly because Phil Noto was on art. And it like the first issue of that book deals with a sword. So like like a sword from space. So I think it's going to be super important read if you want any backstory. At least maybe backstory that is optional. But if you want more information about these swords that isn't probably coming from the main X of Swords book, I think Cable is a good primer to get you started, even if it is a little odd. And for some reason, Cable is dating all of the Stepford Cuckoos. I don't understand that. He's dating all of them at once. But, it's fine, I guess. It's, it's a different life, different world that we're living in, I guess.
That's right. Sexual politics on Krakoa are very malleable.
Dude, amazing. That's a whole other thing, right? Because, I mean, could we talk about the Cyclops, Jean Grey, Wolverine, like, triad that they have, the thruple? Yeah. I mean, you guys have seen the diagram, right? You've seen the map of their complex?
Yep.
And I think it was actually even made, not even subtext, but text in one of the recent X-Men issues where, or maybe it was X-Force, where Wolverine's joking with Jean or Colossus about seeing Scott in a Speedo. Like, that sounds like a good time. And I think, like, Wolverine even makes a reference to seeing Colossus in the shower and how everything's big. Like, they're like, and listen, both Kevin and I are aggressively homosexual, but I feel like we don't even have to reach at this point. I feel like they're just full on acknowledging that Wolverine is fully bi, and I also feel like we're getting Jean Emma flirtation too. Like multiple times we've had that kind of thing going. So I'm all like, I will watch that porn. That sounds like a good time.
And I think that's actually one of the things and I didn't talk about this. I think that's one of the things that I'm loving about this overarching concept with Hickman and the other writers is they're embracing a queerness. Like, and there's subtext and there is text. And I think that is something that I think that's why I gravitated towards the X-Men. I grew up being a different human being. I was like, I know I'm different. And that's the main crux of who they are and how do they embrace it. And I've loved that. I think, Emma Frost, my God, she is a pure queer iconography. And like, of course, has a gay brother. It's
Dynasty, honey.
Has a gay brother. Right. And like, she is pure Dynasty. It's just, but I love seeing this in most of the books. Like, it is really, really interesting. And I think that another thing that makes this arc different and special. And I think that's what comics needs right now. They need these like new stories. They need new stories. And this is what the X-Men are doing.
And I'll say, go ahead. I'm sorry, Mike.
No, I just really quick. I think that this is like, maybe Eric, you were about to make the same point. I think fans for years have been clamoring for this type of stuff, right? They've been saying like, why are you hinting at these things? We live in the fucking 21st century. People can be gay. People can be bi in text. It can be continuity. Right. It's okay. Like, I don't like, for years, I think people have been hiding or shying away from that, or they've just been hinting at it, or there'll be a glance on a page and it's like, why? Right. X-Men has been pushing itself for years, you know, like the first openly gay marriage in a comic book happened in an Astonishing X-Men issue, right? Why do we have to take these legacy characters and hide away from the things that have been hinted at for decades, right? I think that's kind of the thing that fans have been screaming about, especially specifically in the X-Men community. And now we're actually seeing writers coming up who have been part of that community for a long time, and they're pitching ideas and saying, well, I want to establish this as canon, and let's just roll with it, because it doesn't do any harm to the character. It like in a lot of ways it honors the character more, because they can actually be open on the page. They can be like who they are, who people have been reading them as for years on page. So yeah.
I was going to say something along those lines, like, but you want to talk about things that have been hinted at for years. Marauders 12, we have Kitty full on lesbian kissing someone, full on. And that's been one of the things that people have thought about for a long time. But let me say this. Yes, everything you just said, and you know, there are certain fans who've been asking for this, but I also think if you look at what Hickman is doing on a very like basic level, it's talking about what would humanity look like in the future? What is future society? And you see that like as a very serious through line in Powers of 10 especially. And I think what he's saying is, why would mutants obey by human moral code, like social code? They're creating this whole new society. They have their names, their own language. They're saying we don't abide by these rules that were set upon us by some ancient version of humanity. They have really no relevance to us. So the law, literally the law of Krakoa, is go out and make more mutants. So why wouldn't they all be just fucking everybody? Like when Cable is dating all of the cuckoos, of course he is. Why wouldn't he be? Like and I do think that there's a very intense reflex against what people see as the forced diversification of comics, and they have a whole Comicscape movement. I don't even want to get into that.
Oh yeah, fuck those guys. We don't fuck that. Waste of space. As far as
exactly.
I'm concerned.
This to me doesn't feel forced. This to me, if we're talking about evolution, which is the backbone of what the X-Men property is, it makes sense that as they create their own society, which like you can say that they've done this whole concept before with Avalon and with Utopia and whatever.
Yeah.
This is different. I feel like it's a whole different scale. If they're creating another society, of course they're going to create a whole different rule when it comes to, there are no rules for sexuality.
Just going back to the basis of House of X and Powers of 10, like the three laws of this island, and that's really that all they need to hold on to is, you know, you should kill no man, like no human, you know, make more mutants, and this land is sacred. Like fuck, like that is the easiest shit to understand. So yes, this absolutely makes sense. I don't think I considered it that way. So that's a thank you for bringing that up. So I mean, I love basically what's happening in this book. You're really opening my eyes now, I think, to that idea, Eric, that the reason why a lot of this stuff feels maybe foreign, but it makes sense for the book, is because they are really trying to create a paradigm shift in the in-universe for these characters in general. So they should be able to love whoever they want, however they want, you know, provided it's all consensual and everyone is happy and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's good to see it's positive reinforcement, I think, back on the readers to say, like, this is a, you know, if you identify this way and you can see characters that identify that way as well, they don't have to hide themselves or be worried about being shunned by their community, because their community is no longer humanity. It is mutantdom, right? It is just mutants who are, as far as we've seen, pretty accepting. I mean, we run into like weird characters like Exodus, who is on the Quiet Council, and like I think Professor X made a thing about Exodus being on this on the Quiet Council, saying that like he has this strict moral code. And I don't know enough about Exodus to speak to them, but that dude seems harsh as fuck.
And he's one of the characters I wish they would explore more, because nobody knows a lot about Exodus. He appeared in the Fatal Attraction storyline out of nowhere, and we got some background on him. Like he's not immortal, but he's been around for hundreds of years. There's something with him and the Black Knight, but like we still know precious little about Exodus for a character who's been around literally for almost 30 years.
When you say the Black Knight, are you talking about like the Magick character from the UK? Like the Black Knight who works like with the rest of Excalibur and stuff?
No, I'm talking about Black Knight from like the Avengers. Like he is connected, and there's like if you go back to the 90s, there's an actual like Exodus Black Knight crossover story, and I think maybe an annual where it's like Exodus back hundreds of years dealing with like one of the modern day Dane Whitman Black Knight predecessors. Like they're connected somehow through that. But
Interesting.
Like it's crazy to me how little characterization and history exists with this character, and he's on the Quiet Council in a really intensely powerful position. Everybody else on the council we know at least somewhat about. Exodus is kind of a cipher right now. Like we really don't know that much about him, except apparently he has some very strict moral code. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that the Quiet Council in and of itself is fascinating. And I think, Eric, you brought this up earlier. I think the one thing I also really think is interesting about this series is we're engaging with people who would typically be defined as villains in the mutant world in the past, like Mr. Sinister and Apocalypse and Mystique. And we get to explore the Hellions a little bit, who are, you know, all these different characters. Exodus is another person, and Magneto, and in context or text as pushing the mutant society forward. And I think that is also obviously a really great concept too. I think it's really interesting. And I also think it plays to one of the things that I love about this book is it's almost like reading a horror series a little bit. Cause like when I first started House of X, like the first issue, like 2 days ago, and you see Xavier as the mutants are coming out of their pods, it felt like a horror. Like I was like, oh, this is frightening. Like you don't know who you can trust. You don't know what's going on. You don't know where it's going to go. And it's almost like, don't go in that room, or don't say, I'll be right back, because maybe you won't be with Apocalypse. Like you don't know what their motives are. And I think we're starting to see that unfold, and you get to see like Sinister's journal, which is, I mean, my God, fucking hilarious.
Hilarious.
Oh my God. It's like page 6 of the X-Men.
Yeah.
You know, and he's so funny.
I mean, yes.
He's so funny. And I really, the one person I'd love to see them do a little bit more with on that lens is Mystique, because I love a good Mystique story. But I think it's been really fun outside of really disliking Excalibur, which we can talk about soon too. I loved getting to watch Apocalypse. I thought that was a read Apocalypse. Right. That was fun. That kept me in the first arc, honestly.
I was going to say, I actually kind of wanted to focus on that book because, to your point of like, we've got these villains and they're all being brought up as equals, and no one is a good guy or a bad guy now. They're just mutants together. Apocalypse seems to be that character that people still are uncertain on, and only in the Excalibur book are people really questioning him, or however you say his name now, which is, in my mind, I just hear it as or something like, I don't know what it is, but it's a noise. And it's interesting because I think in other books, so specifically like the core X-Men book and the House of X Powers of 10 books, Apocalypse is treated as kind of this character who is someone to be revered and actually work with to push things forward in a positive way, and is a core piece of the story. But then you switch over to Excalibur and he's still kind of treated like a villain that people are just okay with working with. Like, we're only going to do this because we have to, versus like, why aren't you guys really trying to work together with him? He's only trying to move you forward. Because I've become of the opinion that Apocalypse is probably the best ally you can have if you're trying to survive as mutants versus humans, right?
Absolutely.
And that seems to be what they're trying to do, despite the overarching idea that we know that, spoilers, you know, they don't survive,
right?
Which is a whole other thing to get into. But so you guys, you know, reading Excalibur, like, how do you feel about that with Apocalypse being treated still kind of as a villain?
So I'm happy to jump into this, but I do want to put an asterisk. I want to go back and discuss how I think at some point in this podcast, I think the historically villain characters have actually had the best characterization of anybody so far in House of X.
Sure.
I think that's really super interesting. And I also want to go back, and I wanted to touch on what Kevin said about the horror story, specifically regarding Xavier in general, because there's stuff going on there that we're not saying. But we can do that now, or we can do that later. It's up to you, Mike. You tell me.
Yeah, just go into whatever you want.
So I'll to play off of what Kevin was saying about it feeling like a horror story. That scene in particular that happened where we didn't know about resurrection at that point. We just saw Xavier standing over people coming out of pods with a smirk on his face, saying, "To me, my X-Men."
I loved it.
It's haunting, and I think if you notice, we almost never, and I went back and checked this, see Professor Xavier without his helmet since House of X 1. The only time you see his face is when he is in flashbacks with Moira, and I think there may have been one other instance where he's doing like a public appearance dealing with human beings. But
there's a moment near the end where he is without the helmet, but he's about to put it on. But otherwise, yes, I totally agree with you.
We also need to keep into consideration, and I know that Hickman has kind of been ignoring some continuity stuff that came before his run because I think it's inconvenient for him. But prior to that book starting, to him starting on these books, Xavier was in Phantom X's body. And so Xavier, and so this whole time I'm reading this, I'm like, is this Charles Xavier? Right. I can't be sure that it is. And I continue to think that there is shadowy stuff happening that he's not even letting anybody else know. Like if you look at that map of Krakoa in the House of X, there are areas that we still haven't touched on. There's a black area. There's like the no place gates that go to some place. They're tumors that Krakoa doesn't know about. Like
it's where they stored Sabretooth at one point, right?
We assume
yeah.
I suspect, like again, Hickman loves to seed his stories. I suspect there's still something going on with Xavier as a character that is going to have a horror. I won't be surprised, frankly, because I think a lot of where he's pulling his stories from are the late 80s, early 90s X-Men stories. If we don't see some type of onslaught thing coming up at some point, I think that's where we're going.
I agree.
Also, notice that Proteus uses Xavier's bodies as his husks, which to me is a gigantic red flag.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it gets talked about. So I feel like Xavier is this really big dangling plot line, just he himself, that at some point has to be addressed. But talking about the villains themselves, what a wonderful way to really get digging deep into these characters that have been around for decades, and I don't think they knew necessarily what to do with them. It was all getting a little bit rote. The stuff with Sinister is hilarious. Playing him as this campy, gay, like mustache twirling, like ne'er-do-well. I'm living for it. But he's also super dangerous, right? Like if you're reading the Hellions book, he's terrifying, and Fallen Angels too. The Apocalypse stuff, I agree. He's so incredible in all of the books except for Excalibur, where he's like the central character and is treated totally differently. Mystique, again, is another one of those time bombs that's waiting to go off. The Destiny stuff to me is like, I always loved Destiny. I remember like being very upset when she got killed off like decades ago. That storyline I think is going to be hugely important in like a year or two. The Destiny Mystique ticking time bomb thing, and the fact that we've not seen anything from Moira since House of X wrapped, like it's just hanging out there, and I'm so desperate to get back to it, but I know he's not going to do that for at least a while.
And that's what makes these stories so brilliant, right? Is that he laid the groundwork for dozens of stories to either unravel this era or to drive it in a totally different direction. Like he did a whole big focus on this thing about the flanks and the Dominion and Tartarus and these giant outer world beings that exist apparently, but we've never heard of them before. And their only thing that they fear is the Phoenix Force and Galactus, right? And that storyline just disappeared. Like all these different pieces just up and disappeared after the end of the initial storyline, because now we have to like focus on this more granular stuff, right? Hickman sets up like this grand scheme, and now we have to actually go through the motion of these little storylines before we can get to those big beats.
I don't think they've disappeared. I think everything
disappeared
with Doug
in like
I know what you say, but I think everything with Doug and Warlock ultimately is leading to that. And in fact,
given the way that it was these outer beings were drawn, they're clearly that alien race that Warlock is. I can't remember what they're called.
The Technarch,
yeah, they're clearly related to that.
But the other thing, and if you haven't been reading the Giant Sizes, at the end of Giant Size Storm this week, which are there any other Giant Sizes on the schedule, by the way? Are there any more upcoming issues, or was that it?
I think
not that I know
that
of.
was it, because I was thinking
so
that
I think
too.
that's and I feel like it really encapsulates the 6 specials that have come up. It ends with Doug specifically acknowledging an AI that is created from a techno-organic virus that is pulled out of Storm, that is captured by the World, which is the thing that built Phantom X, and it is like being held in stasis there. But Doug specifically talks to it and was like, I know that you're sentient. I know that you're going to be trouble. I'm not going to say anything to anybody else, but I just want you to know I see you. And to me, I'm just like,
Interesting.
This is clearly going to put into something major in the long term. Like Doug is, I continue to say, Xavier and Doug are the two biggest players in this whole thing. By the way, notice how often Doug appears in X-Men. Notice how often he appears in the other ancillary books. He's everywhere constantly.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I went on a tangent. I apologize.
No. This is what I wanted out of this conversation. I had like some really basic, like, so if somebody was going to get into Dawn of X, what should they read? Hell no, I don't want to do that anymore. Like, I want to talk about this because this is a way more. I mean, I thought that I had some thoughts on X-Men. Apparently, I don't because this is like I really appreciate this bits of conversation. I mean, I like this idea that there is, you know, stories within stories that like really we could feed X-Men for the next 5 or 10 years on a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely.
And I'm all for it because this is some of the most interesting X-Men I've read in a long time. I mean, like there have been some really good stories that I love, like the Rogue and Gambit book. Loved it to death, right? But like from a world building perspective, from like a greater X-Men universe perspective, I think we're seeing some of the best comics we've seen in like 10 or 15 years, like as a whole. Like each, you know, we have our one-off weird issues that in story arcs that don't work, but like on the whole, like this is a quite literally a whole new era for X-Men, and it's only for the better because it expands the possibility of what's capable for the X-Men, and I love that to death.
Agree. It's very fertile soil, and I use that with the pun intended. The Krakoa thing, but it really is, as you pointed out, there you can farm this concept for 10, 15 years, and I still think you'd have new stuff to uncover. But that's just me. I'm talking so much, so I'm going to pass it off to you.
I will say this: whenever Eric and I talk about, every Wednesday we typically will message each other on New Comic Book Day and talk about X-Men, and Eric knows a lot, and so like again, I talked about this in the beginning. I have read X-Men for a long time, but Eric is like my keeper of knowledge. I'm like, remind me of this. What was this? And he knows it. So I think it's good that you're delving into all of this and sharing this because you know what you're talking about, which is great. I think the other thing I love about these books is we're getting to see a lot of side characters outside of even the villains, but like fun side characters really be explored in cool and unique ways because there are so many X-Men characters. There are so many, and it is like I will agree with you, Eric. I'm not a Glob fan, and a no thanks. I just like those characters never connected with me. But like characters like getting to see Havoc explored in the way he's being explored in Hellions, getting to see, I don't know, someone like Prodigy be on a team in X Factor. I really love that, and like they're doing a great job with Prodigy because Prodigy can be. I've read his Young Avengers, and I think for me in that book, he was never super interesting to me. I liked him.
Interesting, yeah.
But like I like where they're going with him as an X-Men. I think it's really, really interesting. I love that we're getting a lot of Generation X characters. Obviously, Hickman liked Generation X, and I'm a big Monet fan. I love her, and getting to see her turn into Penance, right? Because that's who she turns into, right? Am I wrong on that, Eric?
It's a super complicated situation because, and I'm sorry, everybody, you're going to have to deal with me. Go through this. So
we're here for X-Men this week. That's it.
Right. So, like, when you look at the original Gen X book, who the person that you thought was Monet was actually the two twins that were merged into one person, and actual Monet was Penance. Right. And it was all hugely confusing. And so I think what they're going with now is the person we're dealing with now is actual Monet, who also is Penance.
Right. So like getting to see characters like that. I never read Fallen Angels. I've not read Cable. Cable is not a character that I connect with. But again,
but this is young Cable. He's young, hot, really cool Cable who likes to make snarky comments and acts, purposefully kill his future self.
you are not selling
know?
me, Mike. You
Why
are
do we
not
think-
selling me.
I don't understand why Marvel did that though. Like honestly, from a marketing standpoint, you just had a very successful version of him on the silver screen and he's older.
Right.
So why are you then killing that version of the character and bringing in a character that nobody knows nothing about, except the only reasons I can think of are, number one, so he can be a romantic lead with more characters and not be creepy, or number two, because I think when you look at, you were saying that the X-Men series, just X-Men, is kind of side characters coming in and out. I really think it's ultimately a story about the Summers family, which is kind of like the dynasty of X-Men. And so for Scott to be playing Father Knows Best, it doesn't make sense to have a son who's 20 years older than him. But now you have the fun dynamic between him and Rachel. And we haven't really seen him interact that much with Vulcan, which, by the way, I love what they're doing with Vulcan. Yes. I am so intrigued by that because that's a character.
Yeah, what a character.
A lot of meat on the bones. And I'm really excited to see where they go with that. But I don't understand why they did that with Cable. But I guess it's sticking. I thought maybe that would be retconned very quickly after we got to House of X, but they're going with it, I guess.
They are. I mean, yeah. The one thing I will say, I do miss some of the more recent characters that I fell in love with that we really haven't seen. But Eric told me that Honey Badger is coming up in New Mutants, and I love Honey Badger. She's incredible. She's my favorite new characters. I think she's so fun. I wish we had more Laura too. I mean, Laura just disappeared into somewhere. I love X-23, and I think I'll be curious to see what happens with that, because I remember reading that issue and going to Eric like, wait, where the hell is Laura going? And is she gone? Wait, I'm confused.
Well, she was in the Fallen Angel series, but she was very much like
not Laura.
All the growth that all the growth that Tom Taylor made with the character was basically just like wiped away for that book, just so that they could be like, this is a team of killers. It's like, yeah, but Laura is so much more than that now. Right. Like she's very much the stronger character than just like, I go blind with rage, kill people now. It's like, come on, like we don't need another Wolverine. If you wanted Wolverine, just put Wolverine in the book. Yeah. Anyways.
No. Yeah. No, it's very true.
It is true.
And I do think, to touch on that point again, what the other thing that we're seeing from an overarching point, that's another post-human race that they're interacting with. You have the world coming from the Phantom X area. Right. You have the Children of the Vault, which those two concepts are really similar, but also very different. And the fact that you have 3 essentially immortal or slow aging mutants now trapped in that particular vault, the Children of the Vault thing, again, that's another ticking time bomb that I don't think we're going to get to anytime soon, but at some point it's going to boomerang back and fuck up some shit.
Sure.
It's super interesting. It does piss me off that they brought back Sync and literally wrote him off within a month.
Yes, same. I've liked X-Force a lot. I am very curious who Colossus's brother is working with, who that shadow organization is. That has been pretty fascinating to me as a villain group. Those were the people who sent the people into, spoiler, assassinate Professor Xavier. I don't know who that masked person is. That hasn't been revealed yet, or we don't have a clue as to who that is, right?
We don't, and it is weird to me because the fact that they're wearing a mask makes it, the assumption as a reader is that it's someone we would know.
Right.
Right. But yeah, it's that I love, like they're generally like a terrifying organization. Yeah. And it's kind of taken the Reavers concept, which kind of becomes stale in the 90s and really reinvigorated it. But I agree. Actually, the most interesting thing in X-Force to me, and sorry, Mike, if we're going off your topic now.
This is perfect. Keep going.
Great. Is I'm so fascinated by what they're doing with Beast.
Yes.
Because Beast has been a really controversial figure for quite some time now. He's really been making what I consider to be awful choices. And I'm like, Beast is due for redemption. Beast is due for a redemption. Beast in X-Force is worse than he's ever been. Beast in X-Force is like setting up internment camps at the border level bad. And I'm very intrigued by at what point do you either just kill this character or just reboot him? Because he's getting to a point where he's unfixable. Oh, right. Go for it.
I think he's Dark Beast.
Well, actually, you know what? I think that I like that idea a lot because there is kind of a question of does he just become Dark Beast, right? My thought is, and Kevin, if you have more to elaborate on, I feel free to do so. My thought is, so there's this concept that keeps getting touched on right after they introduce the idea of resurrection protocols, is that Xavier, he keeps a backup of people's minds and all this other stuff, and that there is a possibility to revert yourself to an earlier state of yourself.
Yes.
I have a feeling that Beast, with what all the kind of bad stuff that he's been doing, Professor X is going to like revert him to a time before that. He's going to do something so bad that he's going to be like, I can't be this person anymore. Right. And he's going to ask to be reverted back to this, like, maybe really, really far back. They're going to like twist on the idea of, oh, we'll just go back a few months. It's going to be like, no, I want to go back a few years or something. I think that that's the direction that they're going to go with. Because there's also this concept that they touch on like 3 times in the HoXPox book about the idea of putting a different mind into the body of someone else.
Yes.
Which, who knows how they're going to explore that. I mean...
Right.
But I think that with Beast, he's going to do something that he can't live with, and he's going to ask Professor X to revert him not to an earlier state of like Dawn of X Beast, but even further back to like before he could make any of those bad choices, to see if he could redo the world. I have a feeling that's what's going to happen. That's my guess.
I think it's an interesting idea because you have to do something at some point to redeem this character. I don't know how much, like, he's becoming the William Barr of the X-Men universe. And like, I just don't know how much longer you can go down that road. But 2 thoughts that come to me immediately are, number one, if you bring back Beast in a new body, is that going to be a blue furred body? Because technically he's only in that state because of he was experimenting on himself. Right. Like his natural mutation is just dude with big feet and big hands.
Interesting.
Over the years that has changed because he kept experimenting on himself, and now he's like constantly evolving/devolving. But it's a question I have for like, I know for a fact that when they bring back Wolverine, they literally have a bath of adamantium there to re-adamantium him here. They establish that in X-Force. But what about other characters who have been physically altered in some way? Like, do they just fix that? So that's one question.
Yeah, what do you do with Cable, with the techno-organic virus?
Yeah, he doesn't have the TO virus if you bring him back. Then he's essentially Strife, right? Because he doesn't have that in him. By the way, Strife is a dangling plot line that we have not touched on.
Oh, that was incredible.
He's a notable absence in all of this. And I don't even know what the last time that character appeared, but like, I do feel like the Mutant Liberation Front has been referenced fairly recently, and that's a whole 90s plotline that's been largely forgotten. So I've been curious if maybe he's the one that's running the thing in X-Force. He's the only like big villain that has not yet been touched.
That's what I was going to say. Maybe he is that person in X-Force. I could totally see that.
Yeah.
Which also brings in like the Jean stuff, because technically Jean is his genetic mother. Anyway, we're getting off topic. Right. I'm spitballing here. But I do think your point, Mike, about the whole minds being put into other people's body, that is such a Chekhov's gun that at some point that has to happen, and it's going to be a like break the series moment where we discover that someone who we think we've been following for probably this whole time is in fact someone else completely. And it wouldn't surprise me. I don't think it's Xavier, because I don't think this works if Xavier isn't Xavier. But if it's like someone, maybe it's Beast. I don't know. It's just, it's out there way too many times thus far for it not to be a critical component.
Yeah.
I mean, that's also a good point, too, because, like, when you read the first, I think it's in the first House of X, where, like, Wolverine is, like, playing with little kids, and Jean, I'm like, wait, what? This does not make any sense. Okay. Jean is, I don't know, Jean does not feel like Jean at all, or maybe she's a very young, like, because she's obviously in her Marvel Girl costume, like, you know, all of these people, I think this is another thing that we talked about. A lot of people are not acting like themselves in many ways. So it's, I think, to your point, maybe people are at different states and where they were meant to, where we don't know where they're at really.
Yeah, maybe that might be a little bit of a stretch. And the only reason I say that is because I think with the House of X, Dawn of the HoXPox stuff, I think the way that things were written in general, my biggest gripe with that whole run was so many characters were written in like a weirdly inconsistent way, like that didn't conform with how we've seen them written over the past like decade or 2 decades.
Yep.
But the goal was to just complete this story arc right? So I was able to let a lot of things slide because, for one, I was like, maybe Xavier is doing that thing he did with Deadly Genesis where he's kind of just like influencing everybody to get his way, or it was just there and written in such a way to basically get us to this point so that people can then reflect on it later. And maybe they were just under this influence of like, oh my gosh, this could be so great for us, that they just decided not to act like themselves. Because there are moments when, like, especially when, Magneto is showing around these delegates from different countries, like somebody shows up and just acts like a weird, like, servant person. I think it's like Rachel Gray just like shows up and she's just like, yes, and this is the facility where we are telling people how to do things. It's like, this is not Rachel Gray. Like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah.
So I think there was a lot of character inconsistencies in order to get us to this point. And then everyone reverted back to who they normally were. So we had to kind of like suspend our disbelief of who they are in order to get through HoXPox to get us to Dawn of X. That was my takeaway from it, at least.
I do think there is something to be said, especially for Jean still wearing her pre-Phoenix costume.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
There's a part of me that's wondering if this is not actually like Hickman specifically signaling to us Xavier is tweaking these people so they are at the place that he wants them to be, so they are the most malleable for this. There was a period when I was reading Hawks where I was actually convinced that all of the actual core X-Men, we're not seeing any of them, that they're all clones of them, and the actual core X-Men are like being held somewhere in some secret chamber in Krakoa. Because I was just like, nobody is behaving the way that they would be behaving. Like, none of them. Sure. But I frankly think that's not accurate. At this point, I'm like, yep, no, these are the people. Mike makes an excellent point that now they don't have to feel so burdened. There's like this general optimism that they haven't felt in many, many years. Mm-hmm. So maybe they're just literally living their best lives, getting a drink at the bar and, fucking on the moon.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd be in a good mood too.
Right. Well, I hate to say it, but I think we're running out of tape for this episode. I would really love to keep going with this. Maybe we have to revisit things again once we get through X of Swords. Maybe we do a revisitation, how we feel about X of Swords after this big arc, because I think that would be really fun. But I guess if just really quick, if you guys could pick, an X-Men story that is your absolute favorite that you would recommend to someone as experts, that's what we're going to call you with a big capital X in front of your name. What's your one go-to X-Men storyline that you just absolutely love and you wish that everybody would read?
Kevin, do you want to go first?
No, I have to think on it. You can go.
So I'm going to throw it back and say I actually think the Fall of the Mutants, the whole story, if you look at both Uncanny, New Mutants, and X Factor, which were the books at that time, and you can get a collection on Comixology really easy. That is super compelling stuff. It is that's the era that I started reading. It is weird 80s because everybody's like it's a weird lineup for the team. It's one of my favorites, but the stuff with Doug and the New Mutants on the Animator's Island is it's incredibly upsetting. I just reread it recently. It's real serious drama. It's like excellent teen drama meets sci-fi meets, comic book stuff. Incredible. Over in X Factor, you had the original Apocalypse storyline. And then in Uncanny, you have the team sacrificing themselves to save the world. It is, in my opinion, classic X-Men at their best. That's what I'm going to put out there.
Awesome. What about you, Kevin? I know I put you on the spot with this one, but you got to come up with something.
Question. No, I love it. It's a great question. I would say, and this is it's a major story, but I would say I really like the Phalanx Covenant. I think the Phalanx Covenant is really fun, and that's where I fell in love with Emma Frost, honestly. And I think it's a really compelling story. It's really interesting, and all the different books. I'm trying to think of another one. That would be the one that I haven't read. I haven't read it in a really long time, to be honest with you. But I remember that was one of my favorite stories growing up. I mean, honestly, one of my favorite arcs is, and I know you didn't like it, but my favorite arc, I loved X-Men Red. I thought it was incredible. I was like, okay, it got me to fall in love with Jean Grey. I really loved the team. I loved getting to see, it was Jean, Storm, Gambit, Laura, Honey Badger, Trinary, all this like really interesting, compelling stuff. And I think Cassandra Nova is a great villain. Like I really love all that. That's my favorite recent one. And then you can't go wrong with the good old Joss Whedon Astonishing. Like, if you're wanting to jump into X-Men in general, that's the book arc that I always tell people to read because it's the most accessible.
Gotcha. Well, good. I mean, thank you guys for the recommendation. So folks will, find links and stuff like that, put in the show notes. I'm just going to throw it out there. Everyone should read House of M. I just love House of M. I don't care what anyone says. Love House of M to death. I'm just a sucker for it. Even, it's Bendis, but it's ridiculous and it's over the top and it's stupid, but it's perfect. I love it to death.
And the art's incredible.
And the art's incredible. But okay, well, so we're going to wrap up here real quick. Kevin, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, people can find me on Twitter at @ETKevinsMind.
Cool. We'll throw that in the show notes. What about you, Eric?
The best way to follow me is at Great Pop Culture Debate on Instagram, or just go to the website, greatpopculturedebate.com. Please subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever else you find moderately amusing podcasts.
Perfect. Well, you can follow me at Mike Rappin, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And this show and many of our subscriber-only episodes are powered by fans like you on Patreon, so thank you so much if you're a Patreon supporter. If you're not, that's okay, but please consider subscribing so you can get access to all of the exclusive Patreon series that we've done, like our Saga of Saga, where we go through every single episode of Saga, or issue of Saga, as well as our Doom Patrol series, our IRCB Movie Club, and more. If you haven't already, please make sure to rate and review our show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and wherever else you listen to podcasts. And join us at our Discord at ircbpodcast.com/Discord, and make sure to tell a friend or two about the show. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. Xander is the greatest person in the world because he edits the show, but he's also just a really good friend. Everyone should go say hello to him on the internet. I want to say thank you to Eric and Kevin for your time today talking about X-Men. Like I said, we've got to do this again because so many X-Men thoughts. We only focused on HoXPox today, and there's so much more to talk about. I really want to talk about X of Swords once it all gets wrapped up. So until next time, remember that comics are good, and so are you.